here to enjoy today's session, Data Strategy, Insights from a Data Executive. So let's have a look at who's joining us today. So, oh, Connecticut, that's very early, George. Well done. That's amazing. That's very, very early. Looks like everybody else is quiet. Okay, well, I think people, snowy Chicago, sunny Michigan, afternoon from London. Yep, that's great. So we've got quite a good spread. I'm surprised. Well, wherever you are, if you're in the States, if you're in London, Europe, if you are further afield out in Asia, well, India, from Huddersfield, there we go. So we in New York, well done. So we've got a lot of people from different locations, which is fantastic as always. And what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to kick off. And we've got quite a lot to get through. I'd like to make this session as interactive as possible. And first things first, let's just go through what we're going to do. So you've joined the session on data strategy, insights from a data executive. I'm joined by Robin Miller, who I'll introduce in a second. The format will be that Robin and I will have a good chat about a number of aspects around data strategy and how Robin himself has implemented both from a strategy and data management perspective. Robin is one of our clients, and we've been working with Robin for about a year now. So fantastic work that Robin has been doing at Lowell. So without further ado, and then we'll speak for about 30 minutes, and we'll have a Q&A session where you can ask your questions, and Robin and I will field those questions, and hopefully we'll get some really good insights from Robin this afternoon. So myself, my name is Samir Sharma. I'm sure you I'm sure you know me, have seen me on LinkedIn, have been to one of my webinars before, or been to one of our Ask Me Anything sessions. So welcome again to everybody. I'm the CEO of datazuum. That's all about all I'm going to tell you, because it's all about Robin today. So Robin, over to you.
Morning all, yes. Or afternoon, or evening, depending where you're joining from.
Yeah. Well, good day, as they might say, you know.
My name is Robin Miller. I'm the group data manager for an organization called Lowell. And we essentially are a credit management organization, and our mantra is to make credit essentially available for all in a way that is kind of good for them, good for the financial situations, and to understand as much about our consumer base as possible. At the same time, helping them get out of situations that they've become in through generally no fault of their own, through changes to roles, mental health, through changes to their financial status, through changes through loss of job, loss of income, etc., whereby they have got into a situation where they owe money to their creditors, and ultimately we're there to get them out of that situation in a way that's sustainable and effective, and helps them get back into being a positive kind of credited situation, and to work with them to do that.
Fantastic. Tell me a little bit about your experience, Robin, just your background and who Robin is.
So my background is obviously by the white beard. I've been in IT now for about 30 odd years is where I started. I started by pure accident, because my first degree that I started with was actually fine art at the University of Sunderland.
I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, so I did sculpture and ceramics and glass and things like that.
Loved it. I will take a picture. I did sculpture school.
There you go.
So I'll take a picture of what I've done. Send it to you.
It was an amazing experience, but I got to a point where I realized actually I wanted to do something different, and I fell into programming by pure accident. I started working at British Gas in Staines, going back to the 80s, where a student taught me how to program.
Fantastic.
And after learning that, I've just seen Lisa shout there for Sunderland. I went back to Sunderland Uni, Lisa, to do my HND in in business computing, and I did a sandwich year at National Power up at Blythe Power Station, and I loved what I did because it was all about relationships with individuals, relationships with their needs, and really understanding, how do you present business solutions for requirements.
Sure.
But over the last 20 odd years, I moved across to data as a
for your sins,
as a practice, effectively, for my sins, really. And that was through programs of work, through working at organisations like Sage up in Newcastle, as a BI and MI manager, and a realisation that as much as we built something, it was wholly dependent upon the information that resided underneath it. And if it wasn't fit for purpose, it doesn't matter what you put in there. We're back to the old adage of rubbish in, rubbish out. And that's really where I started to look at the processes around it and looking at how we build out capabilities to manage data. And then move from there and move from there into working for myself and now at Lowell.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. So look, what I'm going to do, and you and I have spoken about this, and really this is a chat about your experiences, about what you've been tackling at Lowell over the last couple of years, and where you began. And I think there's lots of questions that we'll go through, which people often ask because they're struggling with. And they really want to understand, how do we get this stuff off the ground? How do we really start to implement? How do we start to make sure we're capturing business value, and so on? So I think what we're going to do is go through a series of questions, and really the first question that I want to tackle is, cast your mind back to when you started. What kind of challenges were you facing? And where were the real pinch points for the business? Because most people on the call will probably have similar, so tell us where you were at that time without a data management or data strategy approach.
So I was brought into Lowell almost 2 years ago now, originally to take a look at how do we build the capabilities for data governance and data ownership in the organization as a whole. And that was generally it was an output from a program which had failed to deliver a piece of work, and that piece of work was around governance, quality controls, ownership. So they become kind of auditable actions that need to be implemented, embedded from a compliance perspective, and also from a requirements from the audit team perspective. So when I landed and started to take a look around, like most businesses, it was Lowell. We were doing things, but not in a cohesive way, and not in a structured way, and not in a governed way. So we had people who had built capabilities and analytics and warehousing over the last 10, 12 years as a business grows and goes through its growing pain, very much in a reactive way, because they were a requirement and they were needed. And they run the business, and they run the business successfully. But as that business starts to mature, there's a realization actually we need to get better at what we do, and we need to exploit the value in the data that we have that we're probably not doing now. So how do we go about doing that? That's kind of the position that I started off in, and having taken a look around, you start to see things such as when we talk about making credit working better for all, there's a core understanding there that actually this is about our customers. This is about ensuring we have the right conversation the first time, every time, so that we reduce that painful phone call for a lot of people, which is the embarrassment about being where they are, but also about understanding as much as possible about our customers so we can help them get out of that situation. And at the same time, we have investors, and it's reporting to those investors in a way that says, actually, this is sustainable, it's growth, it's there, and going the right direction. But being very clear that actually we have a responsibility to our customers. We have a responsibility to the FCA, and we have a responsibility to our investors to ensure we do this right and correct every time. So there's a real clear business driver here at one side of the equation, which is, let's help our customers in the best way possible. Let's understand more about them. Let's understand the right approach to supporting them, but also ensuring we have that right information. Because we gather all sorts of information. We take information from credit reference bureaus. We take information from lists from the government about customers in vulnerable situations. So we have to make sure all this information comes together so that we're not talking to people that we shouldn't be talking to. And when we have those conversations, we have enough information around them to understand actually what's the best way to help them out of that situation, at the same time as being sustainable in what we do.
And it's important what you say, because I think there is some sort of feeling one gets around debt management, around those types of companies, that they're after you for money, and they're sending in the bailiffs. But actually, what I've noticed is because you've got all of the pressures from shareholders, from the customers, from where we've been through a pandemic and so on, plus regulation, actually, you've got a really interesting view of how you work with, understand the behaviors, and really understand the challenges that customers are having. So it's not one of those, I've got the bailiff on my back and I'm out the house tomorrow. Actually, it's an interesting approach that is for me quite refreshing, because you hear the disaster stories on in the papers and in the media, but actually what I've realized is it really is about that customer journey and understanding the touch points around that and using the data to fire that up in a way that actually helps you have a better conversation with and get to a better outcome. And I think that's where I've noticed a change and difference in the business. Sorry, I'll let you go.
No, yeah, it absolutely is, and it's about being ethical and doing it the right way. As I said before, people get into these situations for all sorts of reasons. Everybody's been there at some point in their life, so everybody has to have an understanding of that, and understand how you best help the customer. The other part of that journey is to support that journey. Where we need to start moving to is the digital journey for the customer. So the customer can start to self-manage and appreciate that actually you don't have to have phone calls, you don't need to feel harassed. This is about managing your own situation in a way where we give you enough information about this that you can then support and make those decisions in the same way that we can say that's right, that's the right journey for that customer, because actually they're engaged, they're working through the mobile app or they're working through the web app, they're managing their own situation, and we're helping them through that situation. And things do change, as interest goes up in the organization, in the country, as costs go up in the country. It's the ability to manage that plan and work with the customer in the right way and understand that they can't afford that. So how do we help them, and how do we start to reduce that? And interestingly enough, if you look at things like organizations like ours, when you find yourself in a situation where you have money to pay, you have an extended period of time to pay that, it's depending on your situation. It's over X months, X years, whatever it needs to be. If you look at the way the UK government works and you work for HMRC, that's 12 months. You pay up or else. So it's a completely different view on it. It's very much how do we help you at the same time as how do you help us?
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into the next question, because what you've talked about are the business drivers, the stakeholders, how you've got to show sustainability. But this whole digital journey, it doesn't happen overnight. It effectively is, as you said, a journey, to use that term. But here's the thing, for you at Lowell, I've gone too far. Why then, and is data strategy important to you at Lowell to help you along that journey?
So ultimately, it's split into two halves. Understand more about our customer base, so that we can interact in the right way. And the second part is have better insight on the marketplace to be more competitive in either the purchase or management of third-party portfolios. So our business is split into three regions. We have the Nordics, DAC, and the UK. The UK, predominantly, we buy portfolios. So we will go to organizations like banks, finance houses who effectively auction these things off, and we buy at the right rate, and we look at the portfolio of accounts in there, and we understand what's likely collectible, what's not collectible, what the situations people are in. And if you look at Nordics and DAC, that's predominantly third party. So what we do is we manage on behalf of third parties in those regions. And again, as important as the information that comes into it, but the compliance and regulations in those regions are entirely different. So this is about getting ourselves to a structure where we have a view across our entire group as to where we are in our capabilities, as to where our client base and customer base is. So client base are who we work for, who supply the portfolios. Our customer base is effectively those accounts that we purchase that we then turn into a single instance of that customer. So from a strategy perspective, it's about meeting the business strategy. So from a data strategy, how do we take the information that we have, how do we take the data that we have and organize ourselves into a way, both from a people and process perspective, as well as technology, to deliver against that business strategy? And that's the criticality around this, which is how do we get better at what we do, but also know that this is a multi-year journey. This isn't an instance of here's 12 months, we've done it. This is here's over the next 3 to 5 years, the programs and projects that we will run to meet the business strategy. And from a data strategy perspective, here's how all those things come together to deliver on the long-term goal. but this is painting the fourth bridge. It's a never-ending piece of work.
Yes.
It's just the bridge will get shorter and shorter as you go, but you will consistently iterate through it.
On that note, then, as you started to think about the journey that Lowell's taking, from a data strategy perspective, how easy or how difficult was it for you to start to have that conversation with stakeholders where it might sort of be quite esoteric for them? They may not be emotionally connected. How did you start to drive those conversations?
I'm very lucky in two contexts. One is that I landed with a set of audit actions which had to happen.
Yes.
There is no way of going away from it. These things need to be delivered. If you look at Lowell's organization, we've had 3 chief data officers in the last 5 years that had not even got a program off the ground.
Yes.
Because that conversation probably hadn't happened maybe in the right way, or there were other pressing issues for the organization. So when I landed, what I started talking about was what I called the foundational piece first, which was, if I split the data strategy into 2 halves, first half for the first 12 months was build the capabilities to get control and understanding of our data. And that was the ability to have data governance, data quality, a business glossary across the organization, a little bit of data modeling and design, because we need to understand what our world looked like. And to predominantly put the people in place to support that across the group as a whole. And we started with the UK, and I started with a pitch to the exec on the data strategy split into 2 halves, and that was predominantly about the first part. So it took a number of iterations, talking to the exec individually, talking to the exec as a group, and talking to the group exec. But at the same time, my UK CEO, John Pears, is brilliant. I couldn't ask for a better CEO. He understands the value in the data and wants to drive that vision. And the group CEO, Colin Storer, absolutely sees that as well. So I've got alignment across this. Everyone gets the value. Everyone understands the need to build that foundation to get the right pieces in place first. Because if we don't understand it, how we expected to use it? And we've all had those same conversations, right? Where we've walked into a room and somebody's gone, "My report's better than your report. My data is better than your data." I've seen it probably like most people on this call for the last 30 years. It's a consistent story. But it's difficult when the latest shiny thing comes along, which is decision science, or it's a new analytics tool, or it's something else where everyone kind of looks and had the magpie effect and chases after it without fixing that foundation. So our mantra was, fix the foundation first, spin up the data foundation program, and launch that for the first 12 months. Get it in place, show that it works, and do little and often drops to show that we are actually doing something. So let's not do this, wait 12 months and have a jazz hands show and say, look what we've done. Let's drop consistently throughout that delivery and build that foundation first. And then the second half of that is obviously where we've engaged, and that's about leveraging the value in that next. And what do we need to do differently to leverage that value? So do you want me to go into what we did from the foundation?
Go for it. I mean, it's absolutely.
What we decided to do was probably something slightly different to most organizations, which was to recruit internally people with no experience of data management whatsoever, no experience of governance, no experience of quality, but actually individuals across the business who've got a really good insight into how the business operates. So we took team members who came from our call center operations, so our CEC, team members who came from HR, team members who came from audit, a team member who I inherited, who was actually a BI/MI analyst, intelligent gent. And then I supplemented that with a consultant called Kenny Scott, who I've worked with on a number of projects over the last 6-7 years, who is really good at building capabilities. And I've worked with Kenny to build frameworks before and capabilities before. So over that 12-month period, we took those 4 members and coached, mentored, and enabled them in the frameworks that we brought to the party. And what's happened is it's short of amazing, for want of a better word. My colleagues have absolutely excelled to the point where I now have a team lead in a lady called Amy Farnfield, who is driving the vision into the business. We have data ownership at executive level. We have execs accountable for data domains, so customer, account, finance, people data, and so on, all in place. We run forums to look at business glossary terms, data standards, data issues, where those forums are tackled by SMEs in the business who understand the challenges working with the data team. We've just 2 weeks ago spun up the Informatica data governance platform. After spending 12 months harvesting information to get it ready for it. So we built our glossary in SharePoint, we built our processes in SharePoint, and we got to a pivot point which said, actually, we need to start accelerating this and automating this. So we've gone 80% people and process and capability and education in the business, and then 20-30% technology, which is the enabling governance platform, which is now opening up to the business as a whole. So I can look up in our glossary platform, what's a customer? What I will then be able to do over the next 12 months is understand where's the data associated with it, where's the data quality associated with it, ownership, stewardship, et cetera, et cetera. So getting that foundation first is critical. And in amongst all of that, and I know we're going to come on to it a little bit later, is the engagement with the business. It's consistent communications, it's consistent presentations, webinars, consistent posts on the intranet, talking about what we do, who are we, let me tell you what my favorite thing is to do, let me tell you what I don't like, introducing us and getting the team out into the business. And what that's done is start to bring the business towards the team, which is really where we wanted to get to, so that now we're embedded in the project process. Every project that kicks off has a data governance impact assessment. What's likely to happen? Where do we need support? So we build out all those capabilities embedded into the organization, and now say we're in a position to start building out that landscape for the organization of when it lands, who uses it, where does it go, how's it transformed, where does it end up? Now, once we've got that in place and we understand our journey of data, now I can tell you, how do I need to use it? Because when I look up a customer, everybody knows what a customer is. It's the same definition. It's the same standard. It can be challenged. It can be, I don't believe that's the right one. Let's take it to the forum, discuss it. And it'll evolve, and it's a moving feast. But actually that foundational piece is there so that now I can go back and say, now how do we leverage the data? Because now I understand exactly what it is.
I think we're going to have to move on because time's ticking along. Aaron Wilkinson did ask a question about data foundation, but I think you've spelt it out there perfectly well in terms of what you did. In terms of the next steps, then, what for you has made it sort of going from those data foundations as you've talked about, and then getting into this whole data strategy piece? Because a lot of people think, well, data strategy covers purely, could be a technical piece, but could be a business related piece. I see it from a very business related piece, and I think so do you. But for you, what has made it a successful piece of understanding? So actually the components of a data strategy are X, Y, and Z. How has that leveraged your understanding from a data foundation perspective into the sort of data strategy sphere?
Yeah, so we had a chat about this earlier about if anybody Googles it, fine well, you get several definitions into the hundreds, if not thousands, of what makes a data strategy. If I look at it, it's ultimately, I think MIT had a brilliant definition of it with, I think they called it a central integrated concept that articulates how data will enable and inspire our business strategy. So the vision we've set with the exec is data and decision transparency. Ultimately, that's where we want to get to. That is, I understand its journey, and I'm not going to question the report, because that report tells me the data quality is X. Therefore, I can make an informed business decision. That's where we want to get to. What then became quite apparent was actually, because the business has grown up over the last 12, 13 years, and it's reactive in the way it responded historically to requests for data, requests for information. I think when I landed 2 years ago, there was some 600 plus databases around the business, and it was very fragmented, and people were reporting in different ways because there was a lack of trust in the places where you should go to. The data warehouse is outstanding, but people don't trust it because they don't understand it. It's not documented, it's not cataloged. So predominantly it's about a reduction of our silos. Stage one, let's reduce those things, let's bring them down. How do we do that? We've got to understand what's in them. That's the foundational piece. Then it becomes, where's the business prioritization? So our CEOs give me a very clear view on these are the two priorities this year. So for our data strategy, regardless of what we intend to do across the next 3 years, this year is those are the two priorities. And for me, that's about creating this pipeline of information that we deliver to a transparent point that allows governed self-service. And the governed in that is quite critical to me. That is, when I say governed self-service, the data is described, the data is catalogued, the data is assured, it's anonymized or pseudonymized. It's landing in an area where people can start to look at, how do I create things I can use for the business? How do I create, I'm going to call them products without referring to the data mesh. How do I create analytics products that people can consume in a way that allows them to answer those business questions. At the same time, how do we put processes in place, which is obviously part of the journey we've had with yourself, of how do we build those capabilities to enable new products to surface up in the lake for the lake or storage area for then consumption by our analytics community. So the strategy this year was, whilst I've got priorities, how do I enable those priorities? Once I've set my foundation, now it's about what are the communities of expertise we require to create those things.
Yep.
So, and obviously you've done a stack of work for me, which is great. Understanding how busy we all are, to interview our exec, to get a view on what their requirements are, to get a view on what that should look like, and what's their need and what's their pain. Yeah. Predominantly taking the needs and the pains and over mapping those into where my priority areas are. I can now say, actually, it's going to answer these questions for these people. I'll look at the technology last. People, process, culture, all good stuff first. Map that out. I think the other thing was from a strategy perspective, if you look at Gartner describes it as, I think, a number of projects that come together, or data projects that come together to deliver on the business strategy, which is great, but it doesn't take into account all the things we've discussed. It doesn't take into account the shaping of the capabilities required to meet it, or actually the business value that's come out of it. It's almost a technology focused piece for me, which doesn't really kind of make sense.
Absolutely.
Whereas we want to be business focused. If we're not business focused, and you can't talk to the business in a language they understand about the value it's going to bring, you're going to have a problem. And I'm not saying shy away from the fact this costs money and shy away from the fact this will take time. Be very honest about it. But you don't need to go right into the technical depths of it. What you need to take it up a layer and just have a straight conversation.
There is one. I'm just gonna respond to what Daryl said about thoughts on changing the dialogue to analytics strategy. I think, Daryl, from my perspective, the data strategy, yes, it encompasses, in terms of the work that we've done with Robin, it encompasses a lot of the analytics piece as well. So one could call it a data and analytics strategy, absolutely, because I think the two can't be without each other. So from our perspective, finding the use cases, uncovering those, really understanding where the data is, and then building that capability, as Robin said, about communities of expertise, and then having that cultural piece weave across that, and the engagement frameworks and so on, I think is so important across that. And therefore you can't extrapolate data and analytics in a particular way of just calling it an analytics strategy. So for me, those two things come together. They are the glue that stitches things and helps the business understand where they're going. So I think that's the kind of element that I try and get to in terms of data and analytics. Robin, I don't know if you've got a perspective on that.
No, I think that's very good. I think for us, it's about having a clear and transparent set of goals and objectives for our data use and its management. And that's regardless of whether it's analytics or regardless of whether it's operational. Yeah. It's what's the purpose that we're doing. If most organizations today, I don't like using the term data driven. They're data dependent is more than anything else. Yeah.
Or data informed or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm the same as you. We talk about business decisioning. We're not talking about data. Ultimately, this is how do I make the right decision at the right time with the right information? And when we started this at the foundational level, we said right data, right time, in the right way, for the right people, with the right tools.
Yes.
Very simple kind of set of steps.
Yeah.
It's complex to get there. But
absolutely.
That's the vision that kind of we have to paint.
Yeah. And, when we were building the vision, it was very clear to us that, we've got to encompass what you talked about earlier. A vision is not just about the data. A vision is about the stakeholders that you're absolutely attempting to support, inform, and really understand in a way that you really can use the data to drive those different outcomes for each of those different personas or sets of stakeholders. And I think that's important. I've seen a lot of vision statements around data being very, purely on the kind of the technology end or focus too much on the data. So I think that's the one thing that people need to, and that's the way that, the business really also emotionally connects to it,
Absolutely. And I think that underpins the other statement we have, which is making data more visible, more accessible, and more trusted.
Correct.
If you get to that point, if I look at it, the reality is my role is to ensure it's delivered to a point where it can be consumed. Watch my hands, walk away. That's not that's not actually how we work. But if I can get it to a point where it's useful and being consumed in that trusted and governed way, I've done my job. What I can then do is work with the business and say, what else? What else is there that you need from me? And how do we help underpin it? Many months ago, when I was talking with our enterprise architect, Oliver Davey, we sat in a room and talked about actually what is it that helps, how is this thing going to work?
Yeah.
And that's this kind of holy trilogy between enterprise architecture, data architecture, and business architecture.
Yes.
And it's how you get in that room. And for those on the call, some probably know it, but it's, business architecture describes the capabilities required and what the business needs to drive it. Enterprise architecture is then describing the technology to enable it. And data architecture is then describing what is available or not available and needs to be made available to meet that business requirement. And if you don't get those three things in a room, it's very difficult because you then start fighting with each other over what you think is right.
And we've had long conversations about that particular element and how often it can be at loggerheads with each other. But I've got there are questions that are coming up rapidly. So what I'm going to bring in one of Chris Gonzalez's questions. So he talks about the aspects of being, as you talked about, you did the data governance, data quality, et cetera, but he'd like to know, apart from the data building blocks, as you've so eloquently called it, the foundations, to show the value of data strategy, how did you show the business the synergies between these data building blocks to show them the value add? So how did we convey that? So how did you convey that across that?
Sure. So we have three frameworks, Chris, written, designed frameworks, which the exec have signed off as part of this, which relate to data governance. There is a data governance framework called 8 Gates. There is a data quality framework called 8 Gates, and there is a metadata framework called 8 Gates. And it's almost, if you imagine when you talk to people about it, it's almost like 3 cogs that interlink. And you're exactly right. They all have synergies between them, and they all hand off to each other at some point. So we talk about governance as the control mechanism in terms of the accountability for execs around their data to describe what is right and what is fit for purpose. We're not talking about 100% accuracy here. I think if you show me a business that tells an enterprise business that says it's got 100% data accuracy, they're kidding themselves. It's not there. But it's what's right for the business and what's right for the compliance requirements, to fit. So we talked about the governance processes, and then we talked about the quality framework. So if I've got data, I understand where it is and what it is and it's described, I've got to set those standards. That's great. But then how do I measure those standards? Well, that's where quality comes in. So once I've measured those standards and those standards either fail or pass, what do I do if they fail? And that's where the quality framework starts to kick in as well, around how we start to put in practices and processes that start to look at data issues. I've got things that are failing. So what does that mean? Well, I take it to the data forum, which is part of governance, and we describe it. And we give them options to say, look, we've taken a look at it. Here's the options you have to resolve this. What would you like to do? You can either park it because it's not a risk to you, but we maintain it on the risk register, or actually you can spin up a small program to go away and take a look at it and understand, can we do something about it and what's the business value in it? So with other organizations have done exactly the same thing. So if I take a look at an organization in particular, we did exactly this, same thing, governance framework, same thing, data quality framework. Took it in and then said, now let's go and do some revenue assurance activities to show the value in this. Let's go and find bits of data in the organization costing physical business process problems, and let's value that. And when you come back with a little portfolio that says, I can save you 12 million quid.
It's a game changer. It's a different conversation. Again, we're gonna keep moving forward with the times ticking. These conversations always get very intense. So I was going to do a poll, but I'm not actually going to do it right now, and I think we'll leave that. But I did do a poll earlier on in the week, and it was just an idea of where people are on their journeys and how are we seeing data strategy being impacted. And it's good news. There are people on their early planning of data strategies. Those people are implementing. But what is interesting when we come to one of the next questions, which we'll be going into in a short while, is what are the blockers? So let's go to this next question, which I think many people ask this all the time, and it's one of those things which I can talk about, but I think it's essential coming from a business person like you, a data executive like you. You tell us, how do you get executive buy-in for the data strategy and the data management program?
So you've got to start by having those conversations with your executive. You've got to start with open and listening conversations as opposed to pushing conversations.
Yeah.
And those opening listening conversations are to understand. I did see the question before about what keeps you up at night. So I'll quickly answer that, which for me is Sunderland Football Club. It drives me nuts. But for my exec, those questions that keep me up at night are entirely different, which is I've got targets to meet. You know, I've got a team of people who are struggling to answer these questions, or I've got a team of people who are getting consistent complaints from customers, or my suppliers aren't happy, or these issues. And you know, because you've sat in the room and had the conversations, you start to, and so what does that mean? And if we could do this for you, what would that mean to you? And if this changed, how would that impact what you were doing? So you start to tease those things out to understand what that landscape is of pain points, let's call it, for your exec. And Dylan Jones has got a great way of approaching this. It's those open questions to bring things in. So you start there and you start to unpick it. And what you start to see is almost a spider's web of the same problem across your entire exec, across the entire organization. It's pinned to data, which is, I don't trust it. I can't find it. I don't know how to use it. And when I ask for it, it's not available. So how are you going to help me?
Yes. And, you know, I think as I was, you know, when way back when last year, when we wrote the strategy and we started to socialize it, I think there were a number of things that really jumped out across all of the executives. One is, and I think most organizations are in, you know, and we're not giving any commercial secrets away, so I think we're okay, is that, you know, data was not being delivered in the right way to the right people at the right time to make those decisions that they needed. It was clunky. It was being delivered in a very manual fashion, and people were having to output it into PDFs and so on. So that is not the right way to do this. So I think just breaking those things down and really uncovering that across the execs and seeing those pain points was absolutely essential for that. You know, buy-in. Equally, the minute you start to say, well, how much is this costing you? That's the interesting question, because then they see it from the other side. It's not just, oh, get this data in a you know, good structure and good quality, and we'll get on our way. I think that was another conversation which it actually made a lot of the executives step back and say, do you know, we've never actually thought about it that way. So I think that's one thing that lots of organizations miss. But go on, carry on.
No, I was going to say, I agree with, I think the flip side of the conversation here as well, for the Data Foundation, our CEO, John Pez, was very much, we're not going to put a number on this. This is a requirement for the business. It's fundamental. Get that foundation in. And the realization is that if you haven't got that, nothing else above that layer is going to work in the way you'd like it to or expect it to. So we had the whole, in amongst all those interviews, and you know, we put decks together, and we took decks to the exec, and the execs kind of, you know, mulled through them, and I got absolutely hammered with questions, and rightly so. Well, what does that mean? How's that going to work? And, you know, and it's just lots of iterations and conversations. It's not just turning up with the deck and going, there you go, data strategy done.
And I think that's the important piece. You know, you know, as you said earlier, I think it's the operative thing here is that things change. And for me, a data strategy is never about a static document. It can be inside a document, but it needs to be pinned to that business strategy in order for it to keep moving. If we don't move with that, then we don't absolutely drive out what the business outcomes are and where it's going to head to. So for me, having those conversations with enough of those people to then go through that iterative approach to say, well, yes, it means this, and that's how it's going to be of value to you, and where it's going to lead you. I think that's the most important piece, that then you come out with a strategy that's finessed, a strategy that's been refined over a number of, you know, weeks, months, but actually the buy-in is so important there, because that's where you get that emotional connection for the executive saying, I got it. Yeah, that's exactly what we need. You know, so I think it's important that you go through that process. I don't see enough of it in organizations, and that's why I see a lot of data strategies, you know, accumulating dust on a shelf somewhere. It's never been implemented.
It has to be pragmatic, and it has to come in various drops. And for us, those drops were foundation first, governance first, quality alongside it, etc., and show that it works. We're embedded into projects now. As I said, we have data governance impact assessments for every project that kicks off, and we're adding value. We just run a piece of work which is going to find a large number for the organization that it can save. It's value drops. I just want to address the MDM question that's popping up at the minute. I'd say so. If you look at MDM as a product, and I'll call it a product at this point as opposed to a set of activities, you can't do MDM until you set the foundation organization.
Correct.
Fundamentally, you will fail. Yep. So you have to build governance and definitions of data before you even look at MDM. Otherwise, what you're trying to do is do it at the same time in the same program, and fundamentally you will fail because people then believe it's about technology and it's not about business value. So our last year was the technology to enable that for us was Informatica as a tool, and that was their governance platform, their data quality platform, and their lineage platform. Both the combination of the processes we've built with the people and the capabilities and that technology now leads us to go on to our next step in that journey, which is we are now looking at the MDM platform from an Informatica perspective for Customer 360 to get to a holistic view of customer, which then supports strategy.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing that most people, you know, I've had questions come to me as, oh, so which tool do I get for data governance and MDM? And I would say, no, you don't need a tool immediately. You need to define what you're looking at. You need to understand your domains. You need to understand those entities. You need to actually get business clarity. And I think that's the bit which, you know, is the wrong way to approach it.
Absolutely.
We got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go to the next question. I think this is an important question. You know, from where you've got to now, you've got the data management program, you've got the data strategy in place, and that's going to be, you know, implementing over time. How do you, as a data executive, keep that momentum, keep going, keep people interested? You know, make sure that there are elements in the operating model that can help you, you know, stratify both at a strategic level and at operational, you know, purposes to keep the momentum there.
I think for me, there's two key things. One is passion about what you do.
Yep.
You've got to be passionate about this subject, and you've got to show it in every conversation you have. Because if you're talking to exec, you've got to help them believe your journey. You've got to help them believe that state you're going to take them through. And if you're not passionate about it and you can't instill that passion in your team, you're going to struggle, because this isn't just a technology implementation. This is about how do we enable the business to do better things and support our customer base and our client base and everything else in a way that means, actually, if this was my business, I need to show the same passion. If this was my money, I was spending it. I've got to be honest and transparent about what I'm doing, but instill that passion into the people around me. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is consistent comms. You know, we have. I'm lucky in the fact I report into John Pez, who's you know, the UK CEO. I get FaceTime at the group board, so I get to speak to the regional CEOs and MDs. I'm engaged with risk, I'm engaged with audit. We have open, transparent conversations, and we're consistently in there going, this is where we are. Let me tell you about my journey. This is where the team is. But at the same time, the team are out there telling the same story across the business as a whole and embedding with the business. And through the forums and talking to the data owners who are execs, we push that consistent vision. Now, we'll get to a point on this bell curve where it will start to ease off. And what we're going to start to then do is enable larger and wider stewardship capability in the organization. So we start to embed it into the business that this is your data. You own it. We're just curators of it. All we're doing is managing it and looking after it. Now it's about you telling us what you need. Now it's about you driving this and owning this and pushing this forward. And we're there to maintain that level of maintenance of strategy, maintenance of approach above it, and be directed where my CEO says I need to go, to say, actually, this week, portfolio's priority. Next month, customer's priority. The business drives it. The business pushes it. We're just there to enable that journey.
So I agree with you there. And I also think there's another thing that you know, we focus on in data strategy, which is essential to have, is that whole cultural piece. And, you know, you and I talk about it. You and I have looked at that across, you know, Lowell, and how we embed those operating models with a fabric of culture. And what's really interesting here is another poll that I did on LinkedIn, which, hey, you know, I've been talking about culture entwined with data strategy now for about 4 or 5 years. And, you know, it's become more apparent that data initiatives are not being delivered in the right way, and are failing. Now, you know, there's lots of percentages out there. I'm not going to talk about that. And, you know, Daryl says, you're right, culture eats strategy for breakfast. But I think there's a little bit of what, you know, Porter said in that, which actually means you've got to have, you know, you've got to have a view on culture immediately before you start working through that that strategy. And, you know, we do a cultural assessment on, you know, through a sort of data lens, and you know, you and I have gone through that. But I think it's important. But here's the thing: it's still not being impacted across a lot of organizations. And if you look at this particular poll, you can absolutely see that. you know,
So
where are the impediments? And sorry, I'll let you talk.
no, sorry. I don't disagree, but I think there's an approach which I take, which is ask for forgiveness, don't ask for permission.
Yeah.
What's stopping you as that individual doing that piece of work? What's stopping you instilling in your team that same approach? So when we work with the teams, we've said, don't fear. There's no fear of failure here. If you fail, you get up, you start again, you learn from it, and we'll support you to do it. My remit for my team is to give them the enablement to go out and send that message and do those bits of work and start to change that culture in the business. But at the same time, if you consistently sit back and wait for permission to do things, they'll never happen because you'll constantly get challenged on them. Whereas you just go and say, look, this is what I've done this week. Look at the difference it's made. You know, great. I get it. If it's large programs and projects and there's money around it, you've got to take them on that journey. You've got to take them through that funding piece. And we all hate business cases and return on investment. Everybody hates those things. But the reality is, just be pragmatic about it. You know, I've seen business cases that say we're going to turn £10 million round, and you look at it and go, "There's no chance on God's earth that's going to happen."
Yeah.
So realistically, what can I do? But it's just grab it by the scruff of the neck and do it. You know, if we can consistently sit back and wait, it will never happen. And you've got to take people on that same journey.
And I think you've got to have those incremental pieces of value, and that's where you take people on that journey. The consistent issue that I see is the lack of focus on culture and change management. And we can see that, you know, in the operating models that we put together for companies, and even, you know, with the operating model that we worked with you on. There was an element of, actually there's got to be an element of change, and there's got to be an element of culture here. Now that doesn't really feature because it's the last thing we think about. And culture and change management is not about training. Most people consider it as training, and that's where they get wrong with that approach. So
education.
Yeah. So on the last question here, because I know we're actually coming up to the end of this. How have you started to do this within Lowell? How have you started to capture the hearts and minds of people?
So within Lowell, every year, as part of your HR requirements, your people requirements, you have to go through a number of online courses around compliance, around FCA regulations, etc. So we're starting to put in the data pieces into that journey now. We're starting to look at what does an awareness session on the HR platform look like that you need to go through every year. And it's not about passing or failing. It's about what's your role in the organization. Why is it important that you as an individual take as much respect around data as everyone else does? And what's the impact of doing this wrong? What's the impact to our customers? Think about what happens if you type in whatever you want, and next time a customer brings it up, this is what they're going to see. It's about that kind of journey at the kind of lowest level. As you start to move up that, it's a different conversation. So when you get to the exec, it's around, when we talk about ownership with our execs, the conversations we've had are, let's explain what data ownership means. Let's explain what that accountability means. And let's explain, actually, it's not an onerous thing to do. It's about how you're going to ensure your areas of the organization are going to work operationally far more efficiently because of these things we're going to put in place. And you're going to control, or your team are going to control, what the definitions are, what the standards are, what everybody else in the business must adhere to help you and ensure those things work in the right way. So with the exec, we create data ownership packs. We talk through that. We describe what's in scope, what's out of scope, what's accountable, what's not accountable. We do the same for stewards. We do the same for data delegates. And we take that journey throughout the entire piece. And at the same time, we run webinars, we run drop-in sessions, we run web page updates on a monthly basis. We even have some of the team talking externally to other organizations. I've engaged with organizations across the globe recently where I've talked about what's our journey been like. You tell me about yours. What can I learn from you? And the more you absorb, the more you can impart to your own teams. And at the same time, absolutely. I'm more than happy to share information with other people because it helps. It helps everyone.
Yes, it does. Journey. You're right. Well, look, we've come probably to the end of the session, Robin, and I think that's been fantastic insights from you. It's been brilliant in terms of where you've got to at Lowell, and I think, you know, where you're heading. And I'd just like to thank you for your time today. Thank you so much. And a lot of people are saying great session, and really happy that you were able to impart that knowledge. Thanks.
Absolute pleasure. And if anybody wants to, you know, have a chat at some point, reach out through Samir. More than happy to help.
Great. And if you want to get in touch with me, there's my details. Happy to talk to you about data strategy and where your organization is. So with that said, thank you for attending, and look out for more of these Executive Insight webinars from us at datazuum. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robin.